Good evening. My name is Roland Davis. I'm Director of the British Council here in Singapore, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this University of London event, which we're very pleased to support. And also want to welcome you as alumni of the university, I think friends also from the business community and some also guests of the British Council. Also very pleased to welcome yet another senior delegation from the University of London, which I think is a measure of the importance that they place on the partnership with Singapore. Sir Adrian and other senior people visiting again. The last event that we did in collaboration with UOL was something to do with experts, and it was demanding the end of experts or something like that. Occasioned a very lively debate. We concluded that it wasn't the end of experts, and academics around the world breathed a sigh of relief. I have to say, the other thing I was supposed to say about University of London is what a fantastic institution it is. And I have two reasons for saying that. One, it is self-evidently true, and the second is, of course, that I graduated. So I would say that, wouldn't I? The topic for this evening I think is within the Leading Women initiative that the university has. Talking about women in leadership is, of course, very topical. Many organisations around the world rightly putting emphasis on that. A cynic might say that it's jumping on the bandwagon, but I think we can say University of London jumped on this bandwagon 150 years ago. Which is very commendable. The interest in diversity is something that we in the British Council share. We care very deeply about diversity. It runs all the way through our organisation and our work across arts and English and education. It's an integral part of what we do in the organisation. And I think we're fortunate this evening that if anybody doesn't believe in our shared commitment across UOL and the British Council, we have Dr. Mary Stiasny, who was left a glittering career in the British Council for a glittering career in academia, so she can speak for both organisations. But I'd just like to finish again by welcoming you here and saying a very warm thank you in advance to the panel, who I'm sure will give us great insight and thought-provoking ideas this evening and advance our thinking on diversity in leadership. So thank you very much. And I wish you all a very good evening, and I will now hand over to the Vice-Chancellor of the University of London, Professor Sir Adrian Smith. Thank you very much.
I'll be very brief. Many of the things I'd like you to know about the University of London you saw in the silent movie. But as Vice-Chancellor of University of London, warm welcome to this evening of this wonderful location, and glad so many of you are here, alumni, partners and friends in Singapore and wider. And delighted to be collaborating with British Council, and thank you to Roland for his welcome. And also, can I say a specific welcome to, we have members of the Executive Committee of the University of London alumni in Singapore who are very important to us in the university, and the President, Juliet Chan Tai, is here somewhere. Where are you? Say hello. And they've got name badges, and if people want to talk to them afterwards about ways of getting involved with the group and the work of University of London, that would be great. I don't want to go through the history all the way from 1836, but we have an unrivaled record of innovation and breaking through barriers. We were the first to award degrees without religious tests. We actually promoted teaching and research in laboratory sciences, engineering and modern languages, when those subjects, believe it or not, were not really represented in higher education. First to admit women to full degrees, first to appoint a female professor, and first in the Commonwealth to appoint a female Vice-Chancellor. And of course our distance and flexible learning outreach was revolutionised in 1858 when the words actually just didn't say you had to come to London to do a University of London degree, and that opened the whole world to us, including, as you've seen, a clever civil servant in Mauritius noted that it didn't say anything about the UK, and in 1865 Mauritius had the first graduates of the University of London. So I had the awful task just 3 years ago of having to go to Mauritius to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the outreach. We now have 51,000 students plus in 190 countries on 100 study programs. Within London, we are a collection of 18 federal members who represent some of the most respected research-intensive and specialist higher education institutions in the world. And working with 12 of those, we produce the materials that constitute our distance and flexible learning. So in terms of, and in addition, I should say, if you add it all up, at the federal members in London, there are something like 130,000 bodies at any given time. We have 51,000 out of London. And in addition to that, we've got over 1.5 million studying our massive open online courses. So we feel totally justified in boasting that we're the world's largest classroom. So remember that phrase. My colleagues reliably inform me we have approximately 60,000 alumni in Singapore. Just the way it's built up historically, which means I think that roughly 1 in every 100 people in Singapore have got a University of London degree. Dare I? Hands up if you have an association with the University of London degree. Hey, look, that's better than 1 in 100. Okay, but tonight we're focusing on a particular thing, the fact that now 150 years ago we did pioneer the opening up of higher education to women. And I won't say more about that. What we are trying to do tonight, based on that history, there's a lot of concern at the moment in the world of business and in other worlds about diversity in all its forms. I think tonight we're mainly thinking about gender. But without further ado, I think I'll pass to Mary, who will introduce our panel and what we're going to be doing for the rest of the evening. But a big welcome from me, and I hope to chat to many of you later at the reception afterwards.
Thank you, Adrian. Can you actually hear me without the, or probably best with it? It's a real pleasure to be here this evening, and what I'd like to do is introduce the panel members to you so that we can get into the discussion. And I'm going to start on my left. Can I introduce, first of all, Jeannie Ong? And Jeannie is the Chief Strategic Partnership Officer at StarHub. Jeannie was appointed as Chief Strategic Partnership Officer in 2015, and there leads StarHub's efforts in establishing and maintaining strong strategic relationships with government agencies, content partners, key strategic partners, and other complementary companies. And Jeannie is and has been recognised as the best investor relations officer in Singapore 3 times, I think. And most importantly for tonight, is an alumna of the University of London with an honours degree in economics and marketing. Jeannie. Then next to Jeannie, please meet Angelina Fu. Angelina is governance, risk and compliance professional and adult educator at Keystone Institute. She was formerly head of enforcement at Singapore Exchange Limited. Angelina has over 20 years of experience in financial regulatory compliance and internal audit, and started her career in internal audit at United Overseas Bank Limited. And most importantly for tonight, Angelina is a University of London alumna. Please welcome Angelina. On my right, please meet Richard Yu, who is chairman, formerly CEO, at Yu Yan Sang International Limited, which was founded in 1879 by his great-grandfather. The company provides consumer healthcare products and services based on traditional Chinese medicine and integrative healthcare. Richard started his career as a merchant banker, but then joined the family business. And Richard has been recognized as Entrepreneur of the Year and CEO of the Year. And most importantly, Richard is an alumnus of the University of London. He also sings in a band, and I think might want to plug his next gig, but I'll leave that to Richard in a moment. He was also, you might like to know, a member of Singapore's national team water skiing team. So, Richard, please welcome Richard. And then on my far right, please welcome Sandhya Devanathan, who is the Singapore Country Director of Facebook. As Country Director for Facebook Singapore, Sandhya and her team help the region's largest brands and startups build for the mobile world. Before joining Facebook, Sandhya was also a career banker, working internationally. Her passion is getting more women into positions of leadership, empowering young girls, and enabling diversity at the workplace. Please welcome Sandhya. So, you can see we have here a panel with a huge range of experience, and I look forward to hearing their views as the discussion develops. We're planning to debate the issue, discuss the issue, until about 8 o'clock or a bit longer. What I'm going to do, first of all, is invite each panelist to give a short introduction on their views on tonight's topic, and starting, really, panel members, with why you think it's important to have diversity in leadership. Jeannie, will you go first?
All right. Can you hear me?
I think you need to use this.
Actually, I was prepared to come here with a different view, but since this seems to be a very serious forum, I shall toe the line. Well, of course, we all know that diversity is important in the sense that it will bring benefits to the company, to the staff, to society as well. And I'm quite sure this is a topic that most people are familiar with. So I'm not going to go and talk a little more about that. And because we're all UOL alumni, I'm sure we're all smart enough, resourceful enough to find out more about this topic. But I just want to emphasize, and this is coming from a Singapore girl perspective, I feel that we should not diversify for the sake of diversity. Okay, that's my position. I have been blessed to be promoted as the first chief C-suite officer, female officer in StarHub. And I do know, the privilege in that sense, because after I was promoted to become the first female C-suite officer, there were so many invitations from a lot of people to ask me to talk about various topics, especially on the gender diversity. Now, we all know diversity has different types. There's economic, there's generations, and there's also backgrounds and everything else. But I really feel that we should not, just because we want to meet a quota, and in Singapore, I'm sure you have heard of this, about getting 20% of women to sit in board in Singapore for listed company. And today we're only about 10.8%. And the target is 20% by 2020. But I feel that we should not, just for the sake of meeting the quota, diversify. It has got to be on a merit basis. And the only thing is that given the population is 50% of women, but less than 50% of women are holding senior positions in company. So clearly there is a disproportionate there, right? So statistically something is not right. And given the fact that women and men have the same, or at least in Singapore, again, like I said, I'm coming from a Singaporean perspective here. Again, given the fact that most of us, men and women, are given equal opportunities to study in Singapore all the way to university. So if that's the case, then why is it that less than 50% of women are holding senior position in corporate, in the listed company in Singapore, for example? So why is it that women seems to have a lower ceiling? Okay. Now, I have my own view, because even for me to take on the C-suite position, I have to tell you, I may be belonging to the norm, and I think a few of my female alumni here will be scolding me for saying this, but I literally have to be persuaded to take the job, okay? And because I was wondering, did you put me up to be the first C-suite officer because you need a woman there, because you need a quota, or is it because of my merits or because of my competency? So I have my own view, like I said, where that is concerned. But certainly, since we are here in UOL, University of London forum here, education is important, and we certainly need to use that to help to raise the awareness that women, given the fact that we are 50% of the population, we deserve to be also 50% represented in the board or in the management team. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeannie. Can I move smoothly and swiftly on to Angelina, please? Your introductory thoughts, please, Angelina.
When I was asked to join this panelists, two things that came to my mind is, what is the definition of diversity? Because diversity can mean different things to different individuals. And what is our definition of a successful leadership? Are we trying to achieve a certain percentage of C-suite women on the board? Or we are trying to achieve a corporate social responsibility? Or we're trying to achieve profit bottom line? Means, are we saying that women who are leaders makes better profits for the company? Or we are trying to increase or reduce the gap of inequality? And diversity, what does it mean for everyone? Does it mean that it's a respect for an individual's choice? So does every woman or every woman wish to be a C-suite leader? I've had opportunity where I've worked with women, and because I'm in the risk and compliance sector, there are lots of women who does audit work. I'm not sure why, but it could be, it could be because it is a job that is it's more stable. There's less entertainment required. There's less socializing required from the women, or they could manage their time at home. But some of them, like what Jenny said, are not interested in moving up the ladder. They just want to do their job. And they want to be respected as females. I'm not a feminist, but clearly women do have choices. And not every woman can balance between having a family, having children, and having a career at the same time. So if a woman decides that they'd like to choose family over career, then what is diversity? Should a corporation embrace them, allow them and provide them the support that they need to take care of their family and have children at an early age? Or are we basically measuring them based on their performance and contribution at work? And interestingly, while I was going through it, I actually checked the Singapore statistics of how many percentage of women have received post-secondary qualifications. And surprisingly, among residents above the age of 25, Singapore's post-secondary qualification is only 58.5% for males and 50.3% for females. And that's surprising because we have, if we have such a large percentage of females not even completing their degrees, then, and it could be the older generation, the aged population, or the older PMETs, professional, or even workers, then clearly they would be less to be engaged in the corporate setting. And I'm involved in financial education. I do a lot of research work for financial education. And one of the things that I'm concerned with is financial education for women. Women who are not educated, women who have chosen to stay at home to look after their families, because they don't have a career, they do not have savings, and they do not know how they're going to start planning for their retirement. right? So this is an issue that it's very close to my heart, and I think there are foundations and associations that takes care of trying to increase awareness amongst women of financial knowledge and education, literacy. And we're moving to we're in the fourth industrial revolution. And corporations expect, I think it's not just because I worked in the banking financial sector, we're very much involved in fintech, financial technology. I think we read a lot of press releases by corporates, banks, financial sector that a professional in the financial services sector needs to be engaged with information technology. But what is the percentage of females who have registered for information technology studies? And interestingly, it's very low. Per 100 males, there are only 43 females in the year 2014 that has pursued an information technology degree. Now, why is that so? I've not done a research, I've not read a report, but PISA claims that females do very well in mathematics and science, right? So hopefully that's true, because if females are better in humanities, then if the financial sector or the banking sector starts going into fintech and everyone needs to be basically technology savvy, then would that create a greater gap with regards to inclusivity for women?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much, Angelina. I'm going to move smoothly on to Richard.
Thank you. I wonder if I'm the symbol of diversity on this panel. But perhaps a bit of background, I guess, which maybe impact my thinking is that actually my mother was quite well educated, and she has an MBA from Wharton. She studied there during the Second World War, and actually she met my father when they were studying. But she never worked in a way that she made use of the degree. She did other things, but she didn't work in a company. But I always felt that intellectually there's absolutely no difference between mom and dad at home. So I grew up never thinking that actually there could be a difference between the male parent or the female parent. And so I didn't see there was any difference. And she was a very strong character, so she wore the pants at home anyway. So that reinforced my thinking, right? And all through, I guess, when I started work in 1971, long time ago, it was obviously a very different landscape then. And all these biases, that we had against employment of women, because I remember in the company I worked in, they think that, okay, look, if you employ women, they're going to get married and have children, so they're not going to last very long, etc. So these are the biases that prevailed at that time. But in my company now, today, and I just stepped down as CEO end of last year, after 28 years in the company. And but in our company, it's having the female element was extremely important because the majority of our customers are female. The majority of our overall employees are female. And a large percentage, probably, I didn't count the number, but probably close to half of senior management are also female. And when we listed in 2000, I made sure that we have a female director on our board because women were so important to us in all aspects of the company. Now, I think in a way we are proactive because it is important to our business question is, if it's not important, to what extent should we be proactive and ensure that there are quotas or whatever it is? So I think I followed Jeannie's thoughts on this, that, do we have to make sure that everything is 50% or whatever? I think the circumstances will have to force themselves into what is the reality of the situation. So that's basically where I come from, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we should have a lot of so-called policies to ensure that, or should we just leave it to free market forces and let cream rise to the top, whereby if you're competent, you will have the position and so on, and maybe it's to do with the enlightenment of senior management to allow this to happen.
Thank you, Richard. Sandhya.
Richard, your mum sounds like a really special person. And I have to say, even I am diversity on this panel. I'm the only person that did not go to the University of London. So you have two diversity candidates right here. But I think coming back to the topic at hand, I think it comes back down to economic opportunity, right? You have an able workforce that isn't being used to their fullest potential at this point. Study after study shows that more women in the workforce lead to better economic results. There's a $4 trillion opportunity in APAC alone by 2025 if we had gender parity, and I think that itself is a strong case for more women. There's also a McKinsey study that talked about women on boards. If you had more than 10% representation of women on boards, you perform better on return on assets or return on equity versus everyone else, right? Versus boards that had no women at all. I think it comes back really down to different voices and experiences and what they bring to the table. So at Facebook, we talk a lot about cognitive diversity, which is, if you want to serve a platform of 2 billion people, we should be able to better represent the voices of those people. So gender is a big leading indicator of that, because if you can, that's one way of looking at different experiences. For us, we focus on gender, on LGBT, on minorities, mostly because we need to better represent people on our platform. But I think it also comes back down to if you had more women in leadership, what would they do with it? And I'll take an example. We sponsor a program called She Means Business. We just started that. It actually started out of Singapore, so we're super proud of that. And now it's in many, many countries. We've trained more than 50,000 people, women online, and 45,000 women entrepreneurs through NGOs. And it really came from strong female leadership we had in the company as well. And what we were seeing, which is that across the board, more than 40% of pages in APAC were actually women-owned businesses, small businesses, were all women-owned. So I think one is recognizing the trend and what you're seeing, but two is equally having leadership in the company that has probably a different view of looking at that and then saying, okay, fine, what can we do with this? So I'd just offer up saying that if I think about diversity, I don't think of it just as a quota where you putting more women, let's make it 50%, but I do think that different voices add a different nuance to any debate in the room. I used to work in banking, I was an MD, and I can tell you this, when I'd walk into certain committees and there were only men, it still happens in Singapore, by the way, it does. I think about those times, and it was a little intimidating to be the only different voice in the room, and that was definitely something that was something that I experienced, and I know with my mentoring of many women as well, that's also something they experience. And sometimes you may not voice your opinion if you're the only woman. So to the extent that more women in the room add to more livelier debate, I'm all for quotas. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panel. I have a question myself before we move on to ask for questions from the floor, and it's really to say, what of the future? The Gender Gap report actually talks about introduced by the World Economic Forum, talks about the current rate of progress. It says that the overall gender gap can be closed in 61 years in Western Europe, in 62 years in South Asia, in 102 years in Sub-Saharan Africa, in 161 years in East Asia, and 168 years in North America. Where are we going for the future? Anyone on the panel want to just comment on that? What hope is there for the future? Richard.
I'm not sure you should rely on those statistics to start with, because I think they're extrapolating a particular rate of growth, which is historic. But going forward, anything can happen. Anything can happen. So I'm not sure that it's going to take that long.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the UK made it mandatory for companies to release pay. And I think that was quite telling. We released our report as well. And I think the one thing I'd offer up is that when I was in banking, a lot of the bonuses, the pay hikes, all of that, in many places are not formulaic. You set the rating, but you also decide, based on how you're feeling that month, and hopefully you're a good boss. But there is still unconscious bias, and there is a high element of discretion that you exercise when you set this. One of the things that I really liked about what we do at Facebook is that it's formulaic. Once you set the rating and you go through the calibration and all of that, you go through that as a team, and then you set a rating for someone, then the system takes over and HR has the same pay bands, and at a level we pay the same amount. And I think that's one way of addressing the pay gap, because if we wait for increases, because at this whole 70 cents to the dollar could be negotiation, could be various bunch of reasons why women get paid less than men, that's never going to get fixed if I don't think you address it head on, and either more surveys and results that you share, or companies taking proactive moves like trying to remove the human bias from the process.
Thank you. Angelina.
Well, I'm not surprised, honestly, because although there are lots more awareness going on to reduce the gender gap, but I'm concerned for a certain part of the population where things are doing very well. For example, we talk about, there were statistics of Africa. I attended a graduation ceremony in London, my graduation ceremony, and I was delighted because I met so many African friends. And they were sharing with me about how difficult it was for them to get an education. And every one of them that I met and spoke with had an aspiration. They want to help children in their villages and women in their villages to gain an education. But it is tough. So in certain parts of the countries, there are lots of awareness going on. But for the developed nations, for example, Singapore, we have a very blessed nation. Our government does a very good job in trying to reduce inequality in all aspects. But our younger generation is growing up in a comfortable environment. Education in every higher institution of higher learning has diversity as a compulsory subject because of globalization. And so we need to be cognizant that we don't take that for granted. Because once we take that for granted, then the efforts of the activists, I say people who are promoting gender equality and opportunity for women, the efforts can go down the drain very quickly. So I think the efforts needs to be enhanced, awareness needs to be continued, even though we've reached this stage of comfort. We need to be more engaged in the community and out of the community where we see these problems emerging. Yeah.
Thank you. Jeannie, do you want to come in?
Did you say 62 years for Southeast Asia?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think in Singapore, like Angelina said, I think we were quite blessed. The Singapore Education Minister, Ong Ye Kung, recently in the Youth Forum Dialogue session, he said that Singapore must ensure diversity at the top of the Singapore government. So, in Singapore, we are somewhat a nanny state, right? So government said so, everybody else will follow. Truth be told, a lot of us in the listed company, we are all already embracing that, which is why most of us would have women in the board and women in the senior management team. At least for my company, 40% of the management team are women. And if you look at our recent annual report, the top 5 senior, because listed company, we have to declare top 5 highest paid senior executive. And of the 5 there, 3 of us are women. So I think we don't have that much. I don't think we need 62 years.
Fingers crossed. Thank you. Any questions now from the floor to come in on this? Question there. Microphones will be brought to you, so third row up on the left.
Sorry,
third row up. That's it. Thank you.
Hi. Not so much a question, just a comment on Madam Ginny and Richard's statement on the having a quota for the sake of diversity. I do think that, although I do agree to some extent that you shouldn't do things for the sake of doing it, because there are other things that are more important, like qualification, skill, and so on. But I do think that, although that I agree with that statement, I also do think that it is important to ensure that certain controls are in place for groups in society that are less, that have less advantage. So, although I think in Singapore, like you said, I mean, I think the proportions of female in StarHub, for example, that's quite amazing. In my growing up in Singapore, I never felt like the women were underprivileged or, in any way. But I do think that because women, especially in leadership, by the time they hit that age group, they would have already been at disadvantage by, having a family and so on. I do think that certain controls should be in place to ensure that they still have a chance to get in such positions. So if we took Singapore, for example, where we have ethnic groups that are not as privileged as others, like for example, the Malay population is one of the lowest earning populations in the country, and therefore they may have difficulties getting an education in Singapore, and therefore a control was put in place to ensure that they get free education up to a certain level. So such control, although you can argue that they may not be qualified, it helps them get in. I understand. Sorry, I just wanted to get your response on it. Sorry, I stopped here.
Thank you. Thank you. Any comments from the panel at that?
I could go, actually. I actually agree with what you said in terms of just controls. One way to think about it is not a hard quota in terms of, say, 50% women in leadership or whatever, but just pipelining, right? Looking a little harder. Even in your interview slate, do you have enough representation that actually get through to the interview stage? We found that in some cases we weren't, so we actually put controls around that, where we said, okay, fine, when we interview, at least let's look a little longer, harder, to find a slate at least that is diverse. And then we found that actually helped, because when you're investing time to look a little longer and harder and further, then you open up also in tech to non-tech fields. I come from a non-tech background. I'm a banker. But once I went through the full interview loop, I did get the role as well. So I think there's that, which is not exactly quota, but I think helps you get to, say, a 2020 number on a board or whatever else. It takes you directionally there.
Thank you. We have another question there. Can people keep their questions or comments to short ones so that we get lots in, please? Thank you.
Hi, Mary. We met last year. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, my name is Raymond. My concern about diversity, women's participation in board is actually quite similar. The concern is similar to Jenny, right? But on the quota that we need to meet, and by pushing all the numbers in, and my concern is whether when we have enough quota in the board of public listed companies, how much influence will this woman on board decisions? That is one concern, especially in the Asian region, which I think we are quite a male chauvinist. We have that kind of culture, all right? So by putting female there, female on board in charge of what? In charge of the nomination committee, or in charge of audit committee, and how influential are these women on the board? Are they chairing the committee, or are they just a member, a passive member? We do not know. So until now, even for males' participation at board level, the independent directors. There's no real standards or third party that goes into to check on them as well. So many of them can just sit there for 10, 15 years. I do not know what is the standard right now. All right, and can be very passive. And some of them can take 15 appointments, to sit on board. I don't think that can be very effective, and that should be monitored.
Thank you. Panel, are there any comments on that?
No, I just want to say that the recent regulations by SGX, your ex-boss, is 9 years for independent directors. Yeah.
It's still bad if you keep quiet and sit there.
Sure, I totally agree with you.
So the message is, get on the board, but do something. Another question here in front of Raymond there. Thank you.
Hello. My comment and question, I suppose, is you talk about there's not an appetite for quotas, and I can totally understand why that's the case. Part of that is people believe then, oh, did she get promoted because we need that number? And I totally understand that. We have had hundreds of years of people being promoted who are mediocre, without any transparency, without any agenda as to why or how. Hundreds of years of it. The systems are built around it. So please don't be so afraid.
Panel, comments? Comments from any members of the panel?
I will tell you my own experience, why I hesitated to take up the promotion when it was offered to me. When a CEO put up for promotion and when the board gave the blessing, I actually told the chairman, I'm not very keen to be promoted, and he was a bit concerned and he asked me why. And I said, for me, it's a case whereby I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing. And the thought of having a chief title in front, because when they pay you more, the responsibility is more. And I'm concerned of the fact that my husband, who is brilliant, smart scholars, in Singapore, but his journey in career is not as smooth as mine. So I'm lucky and blessed in that sense, and I'm concerned from Singaporean perspective, how will he feel if people start addressing him as Mr. Ong, as my maiden name, rather than his name. And I was also concerned about, not spending enough time with my family, because I really travel quite extensively for my job, and I am concerned about that. So that was my own struggle internally, whether I will have the ability to juggle, to have the cake and eat it too in that sense. And I'm not terribly an ambitious person, but it's just so happened that my career path has been very smooth for me, and people headhunt me to join them and stuff like that. So, but I have to be concerned about how my other half will feel, and I will be the first to tell you that I will give up everything for family, just at the snap of a finger. Yeah, so that is just my own challenge. But of course, for other women, and I repeatedly say that, you should take the job, because you're the best in the job. And I'm brought up, just like, Richard, my mom, bring us up, knowing that I never think that women, it's not possible for us to do anything. So I've brought up thinking that, yes, nothing is impossible in that sense. And Singapore's education system is such that we all know that it is your merit that you get to where you are. So not accepting that chief title role, not because I don't think I'm good enough. On the contrary, I've won enough awards out there for all the roles that I took on in the company. But it's really more my own internal struggle, whether I will be able to be good in both, be a good mom, good daughter-in-law, good career woman, or will I burn both ends of my candle? So it's just my own internal. Sorry to take your time.
Thank you, Jenny. Angelina?
I think diversity is to respect that every woman has a choice. Yeah, and but in my view, every policy, there's a risk of it being symbolic, But what's important is when an opportunity is given. For example, I used to work as an Asian head of compliance for a Japanese firm, and with the Japanese, they're not very open to women being leaders. When I was invited to, but I had to demonstrate that I was serious about my job, and I could perform to expectation. When the chairman of the Japanese firm, it's the third largest institution in Japan, invited me to a leaders' meeting in Japan, when I entered the room, I was shocked. Because of 150 tables of leaders, there was only one table of women leaders, and the table was not filled. And all of us was put to one table to sit. Right? So that is my experience of diversity. But how did I feel? Obviously very uncomfortable, because I was the only non-Japanese female leader in that meeting. And I couldn't speak Japanese very well. I could listen a little bit, but I couldn't speak Japanese. I could have withdrawn, because it is very pressurizing. Because in Japan, you need to be able to drink with the men. You need to be able to go for after drinks, after work, for drinks after work. That's their culture. You know, it's not about discrimination, the culture. But that didn't deter me from being professional about my work. And I think that is a message to every woman. There are always challenges when we ask for the paths to be open to us. The question is whether we want to take it up and how do we want to project ourselves. So that's all.
Thank you.
Now I know why 161 years for East Asia, because of Japan. I'm sure you have heard about the sumo wrestling incident, right?
Let's take another question from over here.
Hi, my name is Chris Reed. I run a company here called Black Marketing, and we have an alternative recruitment policy. We only employ women. So I have 25 women because I just found of 10 years of living in Singapore and running companies in Singapore, my data tells me that men are actually terrible employees in Singapore, and women are fantastic at what we need, which is relationship building and actually being proactive. So, but I make sure that every single person I employ, every single woman I employ is mentored and empowered so that she can go on to bigger and better things, because there is a massive element here of imposter syndrome, where they do not feel they're good enough, they do not feel they are, but actually they're much, much better than the male employees I've ever employed in Singapore, and are willingly fired left, right and centre because they just cannot match the women I employ. So my question to the panel is, how important do you think mentoring is to make sure that women really do fulfil their potential?
Sandy.
Yeah. So I'd actually go one step further and also talk about sponsorship, because I think both are really important. And firstly, kudos. Awesome. You figured out the truth way before the others. So I think coming down to mentoring, I do feel like it has to be something the woman also wants. What I've found hasn't worked are organizational-led mentoring programs, where you find either a woman leader or a male leader and pair them up with somebody else, and there's absolutely no chemistry, no shared context. And I've found those programs in my career, at least. I've both been given mentors and I've been asked to be a mentor to people. Those haven't worked. But equally, having a relationship that is which is based on trust, where there's projects that you worked on, you don't have to give it a label. Those have worked really, really well. But I actually want to talk about sponsorship, because I think that's the one that actually makes a big difference. When I was in banking, and I used to spend a lot of time around women getting promoted across levels, and there was this term that somebody used with me called gender fatigue. I didn't know that existed. I was like, how can you talk about gender fatigue when the numbers are all going in the reverse direction? There are fewer and fewer women getting promoted, because this person came up to me and said, the leadership feels like you're always talking about women and there's gender fatigue. I wish they met you, Chris. But I think it came back down to not having sponsors. After a certain level, we found that women just entering leadership positions fell off a cliff. Some of it is definitely choices, right? But in Singapore, equally, you're blessed with a home care system like great education, you have support. I mean, it's very different from many other markets, right? What we also found was the attrition rates weren't as high, but the women getting promoted to the next level were low because they weren't making the high potential pools, which was basically sponsors figuring out who needed to get into the high potential pool. So I would say it's both. Maybe in smaller companies, mentoring helped people reach their full potential and, put their hand up for roles they otherwise wouldn't. But I think equally sponsorship is important.
Mary, if I may, just to address that. When I got promoted to the C-suite 6 years ago, there were a lot of female colleagues who came up to me and say, when I grow up, I want to be like you. And I'm like, you made me look and sound old. I'm actually not that old. Yeah. But what they're trying to say is that there is somebody there who has climbed up the corporate ladder, and they also want to be like that person. So it is something that they can identify with, it is something they can resonate with. So I find myself doing a lot of mentorship, seriously, in a company, whereby I would take a few women leaders, women so-called recognize them as the next tier of leaders that we can promote, and really having lunch with them, telling them, people want to learn from me about presence, about poise, about speaking and all that. So I would take lunchtime, for example, to just coach them, and at the same time, you know, because we are telco, right? So data is free, right, for us. So we will just, you know, communicate or WhatsApp with each other. So it is important for women leaders to really want to go there and help to mentor. Sponsor is one, yeah, but in StarHub we do mentoring to really guide them so that they know and then they can aspire, and then that's how you can push more and more female leaders up there.
Richard, you spoke about having a woman director, making sure there was a woman director. What about mentorship?
We don't have in-house mentorship programs, so we would arrange for external mentors. That's the experience that we've had.
But you would arrange that?
Yes,
Yeah. Angelina, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's very important. Not only mentoring women for becoming leaders, you need to mentor them if they're mothers or they are planning to get married. As long as you have, and that's something we need to provide for them, because if we have female colleagues or working in an organization, their stages of life are very different from men. Men have their own counselors. And not all companies have that privilege of having such complex mentorship or professional mentors. But in the multinational companies I work with, we have got counselors and mentors that suits the individual. The individual has a choice to choose their mentor. And for male, the mentorship it's very different from females because their stages of life is different. If you have a young hirer and she is in her 20s and 30s, and she's at the top of her career, and she's going through a stage where she cannot make a choice between her time with the family, starting a family or getting married, then we need to have mentorship with them. We need to plan for them because we need to help them adjust what their needs are, and when they are ready, then they come back and continue with their progression in their careers. So that's very important for part of diversity leadership, and that's practiced in multinational companies. But of course, it's whether the individual has time for mentorship. That plays an important part too.
Great, thank you. There was a question here.
Thank you for your valuable inputs. I have a question for all the members of the panel. How do your organizations deal with unconscious bias? And how can we re-engineer your HR processes to mitigate the unconscious biases?
Thank you. So how do your organizations deal with unconscious bias, and how does your HR system and processes help mitigate against unconscious bias? Who's going to go first? Go on, Sanjay.
Because we actually have a training program on that. Hi. So all senior leadership at Facebook and across the board now, it's a program that's offered. We actually undergo training on unconscious bias. That's something that we started because we realized that there was language being used in calibrations, there was stereotypes being applied to men and women. So that one, it's mandatory, especially for senior management, and now it's getting rolled out across the entire company. Almost all of the companies gone through that. That's one. The second thing, and I spoke about this, is just some of it is, if you make it formulaic, you remove bias, right? And you remove negotiation around bonuses, around, so a lot of the work that we've done even around compensation is that it's formulaic, and we audit it to say that at a level, we pay the same whether you're a man or a woman, and we actually audit that and we publish that. That's the second thing. The third thing is even in your performance appraisals and things like that, if you type something that reeks of sexism, it'll pop up and say, do you think you're unconscious bias much? And it actually happens. So I think even those, that's where HR comes in and sort of steps in around the systems we've got in place. And I think, I wouldn't say it has eliminated everything, but I think to a large extent, it has.
Thank you. Richard.
I don't think we have a big problem here in our company because in my time there, almost every HR head has been female. So, and we don't have any differentiation between employment scales for males or females. It's the same. And we also use very objective measurement standards, you know, the KPIs and this sort of thing. It's either there or it's not there, and there's nothing to do with the gender. So I don't see it's a big problem in our organization, but I can see that in other organizations, it could be a problem. And I think the problem is to do with the leadership of the company. And I think it has to start from the top, that they have to be aware of these issues and then find a way of dealing with it. And because it's unconscious, you don't even think about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Angelina.
Because it's more relevant in my past experience, I think having policies may not be the same. I've seen very good policies on discrimination, but seriously, it's difficult to enforce. The HR needs to, if it's a global company, depends on where the company is located. Different countries have different culture with regards to unbiased, unconscious biasness. For instance, in India, in Pakistan, Middle East countries, the understanding of diversity differs a lot from, let's say, countries like Singapore or America or even Europe. So HR would probably need to take into consideration the location and the culture of the particular office as well as the staff. Because different individuals come from different cultural backgrounds and ethnicity groups. So they bring with them unconscious biasness. So education would play a very important role. But I think the challenge is, how do you detect it or identify it, you know? But I've not seen a foolproof. I've seen wonderfully, I mean, I myself have helped draft it, wonderfully prepared policies. But enforcing it and making sure that everybody understands it, it's quite a challenge. So education would be the best way. Yeah.
Thank you. And Jeannie.
For my company, like Richard, I don't see that. Normally in the meetings in StarHub, you will find me standing up and making drinks for people. I do that, okay? Not ashamed to say that because my parents brought me up well when guests and visitors come to the company and have a meeting with us, and if the tea lady forgot to serve 1 or 2 people, I will do that. And you know what? All the men in my team, they will all stand out and they'll say, no, let us help you to do it. Yeah. So I think consciously people realize that it's really more like respect the rank, respect the leader and, you know, the position that you have in the company. In StarHub, for us, HR policy, it's very equal for both men and women. We always say that we have a nursing room big enough for all the nursing mom, but we also have a gym big enough for all the men who want to pump iron and for the woman who wants to run on the treadmill. So it's pretty equal. I don't have that. But when I work in China, when I work in Japan, yes, especially in Japan, I would say that it's probably their culture, their tradition, and I'm still sore over that sumo incident this morning. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody from the panel want to add anything at this stage?
Actually, just one thing. I think irrespective of which markets we're in or which countries we operate in, I think we want to get more women to be in the workforce and to stick in the workforce and to, you know, rise up levels in the workforce. One thing that we've done, which I've seen actually is change behavior, is just paternity leave. Typically, you know, we talk about preparing women for maternity leave, but the child is the family's, right? So, you know, suddenly when men also have to take 4 months off and not just the woman, it changes also the dialogue in the company. I've definitely seen that because I have a team that's equally male and female. And I think, you know, policies, to your point, it's not just putting it on paper. Like flex work is a great document to have, but if your manager never lets you go home, you know, it's not a policy that can be actionable, right? But paternity leave, you take the 4 months or you lose it, suddenly people are taking that. So just those kind.
Facebook has 4 months paternity leave.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah, we do. And we can talk.
Okay, I think at this point, it's time to draw things to a close. But we've heard many thoughts, many challenges, some challenging questions from the floor, some challenging opinions. Not everybody's in agreement, but I think what we're all taking away from this is a range of thoughts for us to ponder on and to think further on, and to think about whether it really should take 168 years for the gender gap to close in the United States and the rest of North America. I leave that with you as a thought. A huge thank you to all the panel members for really leading us through, and you for joining in for what has been a really lively and thoughtful discussion. So can we all join together and thank the panel? And at this point, I would like you also to join me in thanking Sir Adrian for his contribution tonight and over his contribution over the last 6 years, because Sir Adrian is stepping down in August to take up the role of director of the Alan Turing Institute, which is the National Institute for Data Science with its headquarters at the British Library. And we at the University of London have been really grateful for Adrian's strong leadership. He's leaving the University of London in robust health and with excellent prospects for the future, and with strong relationships now through the teams that work at the university with all of you, our alumni. We all wish you, Sir Adrian, all the best in your new role when it starts. Thank you to you for everything you've done. So perhaps you'd like to join me in that. And now, friends and colleagues, I'd like you to join me in continuing the debate over canapes, drinks outside, please. Join us.